Hello, class. Today we're going to review Chapter 3, Globalization, so competing in the global market. And this is what you should have learned. Based on the learning outcomes, these are the several outcomes that you should have learned. The global trade, why is it important to the United States? Why is it measured? And why do nations trade? What's the purpose of it? What are the barriers to international trade? And how governments and institutions foster world trade? What are some of the international economic communities? And how do companies enter the global marketplace? What threats and opportunities exist in the global marketplace? What are the advantages of a multinational corporation? And what are the trends in the global marketplace? When you're talking about threats and opportunities in a global marketplace, you have to think about what are some of the risks when you're entering into the global marketplace. Think about the threats. Threats that could be external factors such as culture, political climate, monetary, thinking about currency exchange. Sometimes the money that you bring $1,000 and transferred into the current currency of the country, it might get less. Currency fluctuations. You also might want to see the opportunities in terms of, let's say you're in the manufacturing business. If you're in the manufacturing business, some of the opportunities in a global market would be the cost of labor. Think about those things as you're reading these 9 learning outcomes. Here are some of the concept checks that you should have gone over during week 3 module. And this is the Big Mac Index. Look at this video and let's see what you have gained your understanding and learning from this video.
Many economists believe exchange rates should eventually adjust to make the price of a basket of goods the same in each country. But the average basket of goods in America is different from the average basket in China. To overcome this problem, The Economist introduced the Big Mac Index in 1986, because apart from a few exceptions, the Big Mac has the same ingredients worldwide. Comparing the price of the Big Mac in different countries, we can see which countries' currencies are currently under or overvalued. But the theory does have some flaws. While sesame seeds might be cheaper in China, the cost of transporting them to America might eliminate any profits. And there are import taxes too. It's not just the ingredients that matter. The price of labor and rent is different from country to country. And even if you can import all the goods, unless you're McDonald's, you can't sell Big Macs. So what can you use the Big Mac Index for? If you're an economist, it still gives some indication how exchange rates will move in the long run. If you're a consumer, it gives you a rough idea of prices in other countries and how far your money will go. And if you're really into Big Macs, it's your travel guide.
So after taking a look at this video, tell me your thoughts and review the video again. And even though it's a 1-minute video, it gives you some insight in terms of how you're doing business outside of the United States. Look at the PowerPoint slide and check out some of this information from the textbook. Here's another concept check. And this is a good video about comparative advantage versus absolute advantage. I'm going to play this video and think about what you're learning from this video in terms of what it means about comparative advantage and absolute advantage.
What I want to do in this video is make sure we understand the difference between comparative advantage and absolute advantage. What we saw in the last video is that Patty had a comparative advantage in plates relative to Charlie because her opportunity cost of producing one plate was lower than Charlie's opportunity cost of producing a plate. Hers was 1/3 of a cup, his was 3 cups. So that's why it made sense for her to specialize in plates. Charlie, on the other hand, had a comparative advantage in cups. His opportunity cost for producing a cup was only 1/3 of a plate, while Patty's was 3 plates. So that's why he specialized in cups. Now, we can't confuse this with absolute advantage. Absolute advantage in a given product just means that you produce that, you are more productive at that thing given the same inputs. And so if I were to just give you this graph and you didn't know how many workers Charlie or Patty had and how many inputs they're using to produce either 30 cups in a day or 30 plates in a day, you actually could not make any statement about absolute advantage. But if we assume that in all of these scenarios they have the same number of inputs, so if we think about plates, if we say, given, let's say they each have one employee, maybe it's themselves, and given that one input or the same number of inputs, Patty is able to produce more plates than Charlie, then it is true Patty would have an absolute advantage in plates. And if given the same number of inputs, Charlie is able to produce more cups than Patty, then he would have an absolute advantage in cups. But it is not because of that absolute advantage that he is specializing it. In fact, we don't even know what their inputs were. It might be that he doesn't have an absolute advantage. Maybe Charlie needs 100 people to produce his 30 cups, while Patty can produce 10 cups with one person. So in that case, actually Patty would have an absolute advantage, but it just wouldn't be obvious from this right over here. But to make everything clear, I want to do a scenario where, let's say Charlie improved his productivity in some way, and he actually has the absolute advantage in both products, and still show that as long as they have different comparative advantages, that it still makes sense for them to specialize. So let's do another scenario. So Charlie has improved dramatically. So let's draw our little graph here. So that's our cups axis, and this is still our plates axis. Cups and plates. And let me put some more markers here. 10, 20, 30, and 40. And 10, 20, 30, and 40. And let's still put Patty. Let's assume Patty hasn't changed. So this is her PPF. So that is Patty's PPF, just like that. But let's say that Charlie has improved dramatically. And so Charlie's PPF looks like this. So this is Charlie's PPF now looks like this. So in a given day, he can produce, and let's just assume that they're using the same number of inputs. So using the same number of inputs in a given day, he can produce 40 cups when Patty can only produce 10. So he has the absolute advantage in cups. Or in the same given day, using the same inputs, he could produce 40 plates while Patty can only produce 30. So now Charlie all of a sudden has an absolute advantage in both products. But we'll see it still makes sense for them to specialize because they have different comparative advantages. They have different opportunity costs. So let's figure this out. So we have all the same numbers for Patty. Actually, let me copy and paste Patty's numbers right over here. Actually, we have access to her numbers right over here, so I don't even have to copy and paste it. But let's think of Charlie's new numbers now. So this is the PPF for Charlie. So this is our new PPF for Charlie. Maybe he did some investment or R&D to get him this new awesome productive PPF. So he's expanded his PPF. So what is his opportunity cost? So say he's sitting here. What is his opportunity cost of producing? So he's producing 40 cups. What would be his opportunity cost of producing 40 plates? Well, to produce those 40 plates, he would have to give up those 40 cups. So his opportunity cost of 40 plates is equal to 40 cups. Or you divide both sides by 40. His opportunity cost for one plate is equal to 1 cup. And this makes math very easy. His opportunity cost for 1 cup is equal to 1 plate. Now, given this new reality, so we've already established Charlie has an absolute advantage in both. Using the same inputs, he can do more of either of them. And remember, when you're talking about absolute advantage, you have to think about the amount of inputs you use. Who's more productive in that way? But let's think about comparative advantage. If we think about plates, who has a lower opportunity cost for producing a plate? Patty hasn't changed. Her opportunity cost for producing a plate is 1/3 of a cup. Charlie's opportunity cost for producing a plate has improved, but it's still worse than Patty's. He has to spend 1 cup to make a plate. She only has to give up 1/3 of a cup to make a plate. So Patty still has a comparative advantage in plates. And if we look at the comparative advantage, or if we look at the opportunity cost in cups, the opportunity cost for Charlie to make 1 cup is 1 plate. So it's actually a little bit a little bit worse than it was before, but that's, as we'll see, that it ends up being a good thing. He's just overall more productive. But his opportunity cost for 1 cup, he's giving up 1 plate now, when before he was producing 1/3 of a plate. And that's because in the other scenario, he was kind of more one-sided, I guess is one way to say it. But his opportunity cost for producing a cup is still cheaper than Patty's. Her cost of producing a cup is 3 plates, her opportunity cost, while his is only 1 plate. So he still has the comparative advantage. He still has the comparative advantage in cups. So Charlie should still specialize in cups. Specialize in cups. And Patty should still specialize in plates. And to show that they can still get an outcome that is beyond even Charlie's production possibilities frontier, let's think about how they could trade. So Charlie is going to specialize in cups. He's going to sit right over there producing 40 cups a day. And Patty is going to specialize. She is going to specialize in plates. And she's going to sit right there and produce, let me use a different color. I don't want to use his color. And she's going to sit right over there and produce 30 plates a day. So how could they trade for mutual benefit? Well, any trade that is better than their, assuming that they don't want to have only plates or they don't only want to have cups, any trade that is cheaper than their opportunity cost will be a good one. So for example, Patty's sitting here producing only plates. Her opportunity cost for a cup is 3 plates. Her opportunity cost for a cup is 3 plates. So she would be willing to trade anything less than 3 plates for a cup, assuming that she wants it, because if she had to make the cups herself, she would have to give up 3 plates. So let's say that she'd be willing to trade. So Patty would be willing to trade 1 cup. 1 plate. Actually, let me write this. She'd be willing to trade 2 plates. 2 plates for 1 cup. She'd be willing to trade that because if she had to make the cups herself, she would have to give up 3 plates for 1 cup. So she's willing to trade 2 plates for 1 cup. And let's see if Charlie would be willing to trade 2 plates for 1 cup. So he has all of these cups. How many cups does he have to give away for a plate? Well, he has to give away 1 cup for a plate. Now he would have to give away 1 cup for 2 plates, or he would have to give up half a cup for a plate. Either way, this is better than his opportunity cost of trying to get that incremental plate. So he would be willing to do this too, 2 plates for 1 cup. He'd be willing to do 1 cup for 2 plates. And to see how that would improve, he could trade, so he could have 40 right here, 40 cups, or he could trade one of them away. Actually, let's do a scenario where he trades 10 of the cups away. So he trades 10 of the cups away. So now he only has 20 cups. But for those 20 cups he traded away, actually that's a bad example because Patty won't have enough cups. So let's say he trades away 10 cups. For those 10 cups, so let's get the scenario. So Charlie trades 10 cups for 20 plates. So now he traded 10 cups and he gets 20 plates. So now he'll end up at this scenario right over here, which was beyond, it was unattainable when he was working by himself, when he didn't specialize and get these gains from trade. So this is a good scenario for him. He's able to get outcomes that he otherwise would not have been able to get. He could, depending on how he trades, he could get outcomes on that, well, up to a certain point, because Patty only has 30 cups. So he can only get at best, he could take all of Patty's cups. So he could get something along that line over there. But if we look at the same scenario, Patty traded 20 plates for 10 cups. Where does that put her? So she traded 20 plates, so she's down to 10 plates, but she got 10 cups. So that put her right over here, Once again, beyond her production possibilities frontier, so this would look like a pretty good situation for Patty as well.
So this was a 10-minute video about the difference between comparative advantage and absolute advantage. These are some questions you want to consider. Why nations trade? And here are some concept checks. Let's take a look at this video from CNBC.
From outside the European Commission in Brussels, we just had a result from the arbitration process around this Airbus complaint going back some 14 years or so. The arbitrators from the WTO announcing that the US is now entitled to impose sanctions tariffs worth up to $7.5 billion on European products as a consequence of subsidies paid to Airbus during launch of aircraft over specific periods in the past. What needs to happen now is that this ruling needs to be adopted by the Governing Council of the WTO. That's the dispute settlement body. The next meeting for that scheduled the end of October, but the US could call a special meeting before then if they want to move things along quickly. The EU making very clear they don't want the US to impose tariffs on European products if they can help it. And we've got a statement out from the European Commissioner for Trade, Cecilia Malmström, saying applying countermeasures now would be short-sighted and counterproductive. She says, quote, both the EU and the US have been found at fault by the WTO dispute settlement system for continuing to provide certain unlawful subsidies to their aircraft manufacturers. She's referring there to, of course, the fact that in a few months' time, we're expecting a very similar ruling from that same WTO against Boeing. And as a consequence of that, the Europeans hoping that these can move to settlement talks rather than these kind of tit-for-tat tariffs that might be expecting. Both sides, though, have drawn up a list of products they'd like to target. The US now essentially has the next move, guys.
All right, Willem, just to put it into some context, do we know offhand how many times WTO tends to side with the US in a dispute?
It's not even that. It's essentially going back to 2011, a decision was made. They went into arbitration to talk about whether the Europeans, in this instance on Airbus, had complied with earlier rulings, and that arbitration was suspended for many years. Having restarted, they came to the conclusion just last year that this was something where the Europeans had failed to comply, and this arbitration over the last few weeks was much more about getting the specific number. The US had requested $11.2 billion worth of tariffs be available to them. The Europeans said that was much too high. It looks like the arbitrators have to some degree agreed with the Europeans, coming in with $7.5 billion. That's now available to the US. What we heard from Cecilia Malmström last night, interestingly, is because of that Boeing case down the road being a reason they might have to hold off to be WTO compliant with their own retaliatory measures, they may look at some old WTO rulings from the last decade or so where the US was found at fault. The EU was entitled to take countermeasures. They chose not to then, but they might now take them if the US imposes and they're forced to respond.
Now, after seeing this video, think about how the global community is fostering global trade. What are some of the things that can be beneficial amongst countries, and what are some of the things that may be drawbacks? Here are some questions to consider when you're fostering a global trade. Here's some concept checks. Remember, as I'm just reviewing this, it is your job as students to review the readings and also review the PowerPoint slides. This is just giving you kind of like an overview on what Chapter 3 was about. This is a good map indicator of what are the EU members from the European Union. Here's another concept check. Some of the cultural do's and don'ts, I think that's very important. I think cultural intelligence is critical, not just outside of the United States, but even here in the United States. We have such a diverse population here in the United States that understanding your diverse consumers in whatever business you're in on the local level is just as important in the global outside of the United States level, right? You may want to check out the book called Kiss, Bow, or Handshake. Kiss, Bow, or Handshake. That is a very good book. It talks about the cultural background, the geographical location of the country, the history, and the do's and don'ts in when you're doing business in that particular country. So maybe check out the library and go check out the book called Kiss, Bow, or Handshake. Maybe check out Amazon.com. Maybe even purchase it for yourself as a good reference point if you want to do international business. But also for cultural intelligence purposes, I think it's going to be a very good book for you to use, even when doing business here in the United States, especially in California, when we got such a diverse population here in California. This is some of the charts for where the money is, top 20, in terms of gross national income per capita. Here's another chart, continued from the first table, and gives you some definitions of what gross national income is versus final goods, right? Now, how would one participate in the marketplace? So let's take a look at this news about Target pulling stores out of Canada. And let's think about why.
Target's Great Canadian Experiment is over, less than 2 years after it began. The American retail giant announcing today it's going to close all 133 of its stores in this country. Let's go live to Andrea Puno with how it all went so wrong so quickly. Andrea.
Gord, simply put, Target didn't deliver. Nordstrom is set to open its doors over here. This is where Sears closed its flagship store last year. And as part of the Bay, Saks also scheduled to open up. Of course, these two retailers are higher end retailers, and we know Target is more of a discount giant, and people say it just couldn't compare to its American stores.
When it first opened, we went in here thinking, expecting big things, and there was nothing on the shelf.
Totally unsettled from the day they opened.
Some shoppers were underwhelmed when Target opened its Canadian stores 2 years ago. It was the first strike against the U.S. retailer.
They really missed on what we would call Retail 101, which is, you got to have the merchandise on the floor. If you advertise it, you better have it there with a sign on it.
Two of the big reasons Target failed here in Canada: prices and inventory. One expert says the company simply missed the mark and couldn't recover.
It's definitely an underperformance on their part.
If there are a few products that you like and you come for that reason and they're not there, it's a wasted trip.
Today we noticed some shelves that were bare in more than one department. Higher taxes and steep Canadian labor costs made it nearly impossible for the retailer to offer the same low prices Canadians saw on their cross-border trips. And that wiped out Target's competitive edge. Sony also announced today it will close its 14 Canadian stores, slashing 90 jobs. Sears has also had its share of problems, shutting stores and putting thousands out of work.
I don't think it's going to change our economy. I think there's a lot of retailers, and it's a very competitive market. So I think there'll be a lot of retailers that will take up the slack.
In this climate, it may be surprising. A high-end American chain is moving in, but the rollout of its stores will be much more gradual.
Nordstrom is making a slow build into Canada, taking it much more cautiously than Target did.
And Nordstrom will open 3 stores here in Toronto over the next couple of years, of course, including this one here at the Eaton Centre, while Saks is scheduled to open the first of its Canadian stores, 2 of them here in Toronto, next year. Live outside the Eaton Centre, I'm Andrea Puno. Back to you, Gord.
So thinking about what Target made a mistake. In the United States, we think Target as low price, right? Or something that of a discount store. Something that is prices that are reasonable, right? Lower prices and good deals. In Canada, it didn't work out because they mentioned that the cost of labor is high in Canada. So the cost savings that was afforded across the border to United States was not afforded in Canada. And that's one of the reasons why targets in Canada failed. You have to think about your competitive advantage. If you're offering lower prices, right, as a competitive edge, that lower prices better translate when you're going global outside of the United States, right? And it also depends on your labor cost. Many countries outside of the United States, like China, Taiwan, Vietnam, and many other countries outside of Europe area, such as in Asian countries and many African countries, the labor cost is very low. And if you have labor costs that are very low, your pricing points can be low and still be able to make a profit. You have to think about these things. And there's also good and bad about globalization and risk factors and also job losses, right? You make a profit because you moved your manufacturing or development outside of the United States because of low labor costs, but you lose jobs here in the United States. That's some of the advantage and disadvantage that one has to consider. These are some questions that you may want to think about when you're reviewing this video again. Here's some concept check. And this is a good table that shows you about the 11 largest multinational corporations. There's another concept check, questions you might want to consider and review as you're reading the textbook in chapter 3 and also reviewing the PowerPoint slide. Something to consider. Now, let me go back to this video, right? We're talking about some questions about Apple, right? Here's some more concept checks. Now, remember, the slides are a summary of the actual textbook, right? The slides are a summary of the actual textbook. You're going to want to review the chapter materials and review the textbook and review this video that kind of gives you an overview of what chapter 3 was about. Okay. If you got any questions, feel free to connect with me, contact me via email or Canvas.